Howdy, y'all. It's your favorite Southerner. And yeah, excuse me, that's kind of what I wanted to talk about today. I haven't mentioned it a lot because, I think the South gets a bad rep a lot of the times. I mean, I have talked about this subject before, but not as in detail. And that's that, yeah, Guys, I consider myself a southerner. I grew up in Florida. Um from the early 2000s to the uh mid 2010s. Uh and I know this is controversial, but then I moved to Maryland, and I consider Maryland, especially certain places in Maryland, to be a part of the South. I know technically it's a border state and stuff like that, and I would agree culturally it is, especially towards DC and big city centers, but at least the places where I've lived in Maryland, for the most part, um, or I'm sorry, the place where I've lived the longest in Maryland is more like the South than it is the North. And so including it. Um, and yeah, man, my journey as a Floridian starts in 2001. I was born in Guatemala, but because I have a condition called cerebral palsy, I'm in a wheelchair. My parents made the tough decision to uproot their lives and come so that I could have an education, because even with our and a normal life, because even with our wealth over there, like, your boy was not gonna get an education. He was not gonna have a shot at having a social life or getting pussy. That's just, or uh stacking cash. Honestly, that's the way it is. So yeah, and we moved near to where one of my maternal uncles was. Um, and that was West Florida. I grew up in Newport Richie and Holiday, that area in Pasco County. Um, and number one, it's not a really great area, honestly. Like, while my parents were together and they had dual income and stuff like that, it was a lot easier or a lot safer to live there, because not every um place in Holiday or Newport Richie is bad. It's just certain ones. But like, yeah, I was pretty much the only Guatemalan and one of the only Latinos at all my schools. And but I had a little extra thing, which is that I pass as white. I mean, I'm mixed race. And it's funny, if you're mixed, you'll you'll know what this is like, maybe. But most other Latinos, they kind of look pretty racially ambiguous, and unfortunately, and I say that because of the comments that people made, that didn't end up being the case for me, although it is kind of fortunate because I get the benefit of, and yes, I know some of you aren't gonna like this term, white privilege or white passing privilege. Um, But yeah, bro, it's like when I was a kid growing up in Florida, both my parents are also mixed, but my dad is dark skinned and my mom is light skinned. Like my mom she was a model. She can pass for like an Eastern European lady, but they would see my dad and they would see my mom and they would always say, and keep in mind, my hair was a lot lighter than it is now. Like I had like blonde, like shiny blonde hair, and they would say, "No, that's not your biological son. You adopted him, didn't you?" And they were like, no, no." So, and I would get that all the time from strangers visiting our house, from kids at school, and like it even extended into my cultural upbringing, the intangible parts of me, and yeah, again, I bet a lot of like weird kids of minorities and stuff like that or that are mixed can relate to this, but like I was too Latino in my experiences of like poverty and closer ties to family for the white kids, and I was too white in the sense that like, and I hate to say this, but it is kind of true. Like I never um like I always liked school. I was smart. And like I never got mixed up with bad stuff. I didn't like verga. Don't I mean sorry, reggaeton. And and yeah, man. It was really tough because I never really felt like I fit in, and I was always saying, "No, I'm American boy. I'm American boy." And I would refuse to speak Spanish and stuff. I mean, I know they're both colonial languages, but for Latinos like us, like that is still our mother tongue technically. So, you know, um I thankfully got over that eventually, and in fact, I'm probably out of my immediate family who's here, I'm probably still the best and most fluent Spanish speaker of all of them. Even my mom, because her I guess accent has been so Americanized by working with Americans at this point that like even when we go to Guatemala, a lot of people can't understand her. um, and so yeah, but like even with all that, I still consider myself a a southerner, and honestly, I was put into white schools and non-diverse schools primarily because the schools that like my um socioeconomic status would have put me in were like they couldn't have afforded to accommodate me. So because of the based laws in the United States for disability rights and education, um they bused me to richer white areas where my accommodations could be afforded and that I could have therapy, uh, physical and occupational therapy and stuff like that. And at first they didn't want to mainstream me. I was in special ed, but my therapist and my mom fought very hard for me to be mainstreamed. And I was mainstreamed, and like, again, that's why we came from Guatemala. In Guatemala, that wouldn't. Yes, there are schools for people like me, but like the amount of accommodation, and the amount of integration that I experienced just wouldn't have been possible, um, there at all. Um, so yeah, I was mainstreamed, and um, I am very glad that that happened. Not necessarily only for the um for the uh educational opportunities, but also the social opportunities. Um, you know, but I will say this is that, that's when I first experienced ableism as well, because something that I always noticed, even as a kid, is that my relationships with people were always so superficial, in the sense that, like, yeah, you knew of me in school, and you maybe you even knew me as the smart disabled kid. But that was pretty much it. You said hi to me at recess. Maybe you talked to me for 3 minutes. And again, I'm grateful for that stuff. But I never really, um, especially looking back on things now, because it didn't strike me as much then. It struck me a little bit, but only retrospectively did I realize that, like, I never really had any good friends. I never, you know, could visit them like others could, and they barely visited me. I did have a few times where friends visited me for sure, and one or two times where we had maybe a sleepover, but that's it. In the entirety of elementary school, so we're talking like, in my case, like 6 or 7 years, because of that initial year or two um in special ed. And yeah, I can only think of one person ever that I was really close friends with, like, or maybe no, not one, or maybe like, but maybe like 4 or 5 people. I never really had a friend group that I did stuff outside with other than them. Um and yeah, I mean, what can I say? Like, to be honest, I didn't, other than, where I lived, really experienced it all that much discrimination. And I do think it was because um I was able to be bused. I don't there are a lot of people today that question the need for busing, and that question the legacy of, well, in the South, it was not even redlining, it was the S word. And um I can tell you right now personally that busing got me where I am today. Okay? It's super necessary still. I'm sorry to say it. Maybe even especially now, considering what's going on in Florida. And um yeah, I didn't really experience that much discrimination. I think also, in addition to everything I just said, in addition to my like complexion, right? Uh, and yeah, man, I mean, mm, I was a dreamer. I was DACA too, eventually. Obviously, it didn't exist back then, but I would eventually get there. And, through a lot of stuff, excuse me, my parents separating, and whatnot. We moved to Maryland for a time. Then stuff didn't really work out. We moved to back with our dad, me and my siblings. And eventually we started visiting Maryland every summer. Now, when we were living with my dad, we live in straight holiday, bro, and I lived on a dead end street with like the hallmarks of a low income neighborhood, just the dirty stuff, substances, um, you know, within walking distance of my house was a little strip mall with, of course, the classic low income Little Caesars pizza with random knickknack stores and I think Save a Lot, and then a freaking, of course, bar. Literally, where I got picked up to go to school at that time, there was a bar right in front of it that, went boom and bust every few years, but, rest assured you could get alcohol, obviously, because, I mean, unfortunately, um, capitalists know their clientele. They know who, if you have no hope, you're poor. Uh, Maybe allegedly undocumented. Where are you gonna go? I mean, my dad never did that, thankfully, but, you know, um, and, but eventually in 2009, my mom and dad worked out a system where we would go, um, up to Maryland. And in Maryland, I lived in what I would call a more northern part of Maryland just because in culture, because of its proximity to DC and stuff. And uh if you're Latino, you probably know Langley Park. What up? And it was still low income. It still had, again, the same hallmarks, but the difference was, and this is why I appreciate having lived in Langley Park and later the Hispanic sections of Silver Spring, is because, bro, like, it was my way to connect with the culture. Like, that was the first time that I really saw a significant amount of Central Americans, bro, living together. Bro, I like to call that area, and I know there are less Latinos and Central Americans there today, but bro, it's basically la nueva República Federal de Centroamérica. Like if you move Parlacén to to Langley Park or the Hispanic sections of Silver Spring, like you wouldn't notice a difference, bro. Like being there in the late 2000s and early uh 2010s was so important for me resisting the levels of assimilation that I see with other Latino kids and the no sabo kids. Um and like I'm just so grateful for it. In fact, my when my maternal grandfather came to the US for the first time to work, we lived 24 years apart in the same apartment complex in I think either Langley Park or Silver Spring. Um but yeah, guys, like you don't know what that does to a young man who wanted so desperately when he was young to be white. And, like I said, I wasn't exactly the stereotypical Latino kid either. Neither were any of my brothers actually. But but yeah, and like but again, the dark side of that is that like redlining, bro, and the S word. Think about that. Think about that. 24 years later, we were still in the same place as my maternal grandfather. That's wild, bro. That just shows you that they they try to keep us apart. And you know how I feel about that in the disabled community, and I don't think it's bad necessarily, but under the low income conditions that we were living in, the air quality, man, it wasn't good. It wasn't good. Even though I am grateful for it, I also have to be realistic about the type of situation we were living in. Um, and so eventually more time passes, and around 2013, the summer of 2013, we permanently move up to Maryland with my mom. But this time it's in Western Maryland. I'm not gonna say where, you might be able to guess where. Uh, but Western Maryland again. Um, the positives of it were that like we were finally solidly through the work through the hard work of my migrant mother, finally middle class. We made it out the low income neighborhoods, man. We made it out the hood. uh, and yeah, yeah, and for the first time, I saw or I realized there could be a diverse and non-poor slash middle class environment of people of all races and all people of color, not just Central Americans or African Americans, everyone, guys. And I finally went to an integrated school, public school that could afford to give me accommodations and, give me a pretty good education where I was with other people of color regularly. And that also had a big effect on me because I was like, wow, maybe because I did unfortunately hold some sort of negative stereotypes about my own people and other minorities just because like That's all I saw. And what I grew up around. And, I was like, wow, like it's possible to to be, a person of color and not be poor, you know, be not rich, but also like not to the point where you're you grow up in a dirty environment, an environment where the only thing you see around you is liquor stores and the degeneration of society. Um and yeah, I can't even express what that was like to coming from, again, my hood in Pasco to that was, it was next level for me. Now the interesting thing is that in this place that I now lived in Western Maryland, uh that's where I saw, and maybe it was because now I was older, now I was like 14, 15, 16, and I just noticed it more, but like I've never experienced racism like I've experienced in Western Maryland. I particularly remember um our history teacher one day in either freshman or sophomore year. Um, it was definitely in 2014, so I think freshman year for me. Um, she brought in a a flyer that was basically like a propaganda flyer for a certain clan of individuals active in her neighborhoods. What they were doing were was that they were dropping candy on or near people's houses with this, racist um flyer, so that little kids would pick it up and then give it to their parents, and their parents would read it, and it was from a certain clan of individuals. And like I remember it so clearly because it had like a photo of a white guy and then a photo of Martin Luther King. Um and it had like a little blurb about their skull shape and stuff, which, if you know anything of the history of scientific racism, that's the discredited pseudoscience of phrenology um that they were talking about. And and there was other stuff about the Jews, and like I had never seen such a thing in my life. I was shocked, guys. And I would be lying to you if I said that I'm not careful um where I speak my mother tongue around people where I live. I'm just gonna be honest with you. Although to be honest, they're kind of confused. Usually, I get looks of confusion because they're confused why a person that looks like me is, speaking Spanish, even though it's literally a European language. But to them, a person like me isn't supposed to be speaking that. They They think that only brown people speak it or something like that. Probably. But still, I'm very careful about that stuff around here because, like, well, what I just described to you is a pretty regular thing, guys. Like, and what is really shocking to me is that, like, we literally got priced out of Montgomery County by NIMBYs, bro. Like, we aren't the ones that drive property values. It's NIMBYs, bro. Like, what am like, it's gonna be, you know, maintaining a safe neighborhood or maintaining the integrity of their neighborhood, but what they really want to say is the S word. Uh, the, or that's what they really mean by it. Uh, so yeah, those are my experiences growing up in, what I feel would be considered still, even to this day, the South, and then also the historical South, which I consider Maryland to still be in some ways. Thank you very much. Bye.